So good morning, everyone. Good morning and welcome to Kristi House's Education Symposium. And as we wait for all participants to join, I invite you to drop your name or the name and location of your agency in the chat feature, and this will give us an idea or a quick view of who is joining us today and from where. So we have a lot of folks from around, a lot of school folks, GAL, GAL, all over the country. Very good. So thank you for joining and welcome. Napa, a lot of folks, okay. So welcome everyone, and thank you for joining Kristi House's panel discussion, Keeping Children Safe from Human Trafficking, an Education Symposium. I am very happy to be with you today, and my name is Deborah Billings, and I serve as the Education and Outreach Program Supervisor at Kristi House. And today I also have the pleasure of serving as your moderator. Next slide, okay. Kristi House is the Children's Advocacy Center of Miami-Dade County, and we are part of a network of over 900 children advocacy centers nationwide. At Kristi House, we are dedicated to healing and eradicating child abuse and child sex trafficking. We work nationally on solutions and locally to heal child victims. We are responsible for coordinating the child victim's legal, medical, and social service needs. Kristi House is nationally recognized for its evidence-based therapeutic expertise in treating child trauma. And we are also one of the first child advocacy centers in the country to address the issue of commercial sexual exploitation. All of our services are provided at no charge to families. Kristi House is also a nonprofit agency, and a large portion of our funding comes through grantors. Particularly within the education department, it's important for us to have our pre and post-test surveys completed. Last Monday, you should have received a link to complete a pre-test survey. If you did not have the opportunity to complete it, please do so now. Patricia, she is dropping that link in the chat for you. So please take a moment and complete that pre-test survey now. And as you do so, I am going to go ahead and continue with the housekeeping items. I also want to note that the link that you received is going to be used to complete the pre-test as well as the post-test. So you will use the same link. Thanks. So if you're interested in learning more about Kristi House's programs and services or our educational offerings, please visit our website at kristihouse.org. That's KRISTI house.org. Next slide, please. I want to say thank you very much to our grantors. Today's symposium is made possible due to the support of the Ocean Reef Community Foundation. Thank you very much. And on behalf of Project Gold, I'd like to acknowledge and to mention their support, in which it comes from these different foundations that are mentioned here, Regions Bank, as well as the federal agencies, the U.S. Department of Justice and the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. So again, on behalf of Project Gold, thank you to our grantors. Next slide, please. So I'd like to take a moment to talk a little bit about Project Gold. Project Gold is a branch of Kristi House. It is a membership organization for girls who have experienced or who are at risk for commercial sexual exploitation. Although Project Gold is a drop-in center and not a residential center, many sexually exploited girls still consider it their home. It is a place where girls are empowered to find their strengths in a non-judging and healing environment. Project Gold is victim-centered and survivor-led. Here, sexually exploited girls will receive restorative services, including mentoring, group therapy, case management, advocacy, transportation, educational, and recreational enrichment. Next slide, please. So it's my pleasure to introduce part of the leadership of Project Gold. First, we have Marta Martinez, who is the director of Project Gold. And we also have Bradel Canfield, who is the program manager at Project Gold. And both Marta and Bradel are panelists with us today, so we will be able to touch base with them and ask questions. And Bradel is also going to support me in being the co-moderator. So thank you, Bradel, and thank you, ladies. Next slide, please. I also want to introduce the Kristi House Education team. We are dedicated to spreading child abuse, safety, and prevention education to both children and adults. And having said this, I want to thank and acknowledge the Miami-Dade County Public Schools District, the Office of the Superintendent, and their staff for their continued partnership in promoting our classes and working with us to keep all children in Miami-Dade County safe. Our best practice trainings are available in English, Spanish, and Haitian Creole. Supporting us behind the scenes today, please meet Johanny Jano, Patricia Zedler, and Jessica Laguerre, our education and outreach specialist. Thank you, ladies. I appreciate you. Next slide, please. So I'd like to cover some housekeeping items before we get started with the panel discussion. How is our time going to be spent today? During the first 2 hours, our panelists will answer questions. So each of our panelists represent different agencies, with the exception of Marta and Bradel. But each agency works together these agencies work together to combat human trafficking and support human trafficking survivors. Each are experts in their respective fields. For today, I have asked them to share the answers to the top 2 or 3 questions that they feel are most relevant as it relates to the work that they do and human trafficking and how to keep our children safe. The last half hour is reserved for a Q&A session, and we will be taking questions from you all, the audience. To the participants, during the event, your audio and video will be disabled. However, we encourage you to participate using the chat feature. And also, please feel free to ask questions throughout the panel discussion using the Q&A feature. The education team will monitor and prepare the questions for our panelists to answer during the Q&A segment. If we're not able to answer all questions while we're online, we will compile a list, find the answers, and share as a resource on our website. Also, this event is being recorded, and a link to the recording will be sent to the participants. We already discussed the surveys. And finally, I sincerely hope that we do not have any technology issues, but if we do, please be patient with us while we work through them. All right, next slide, please. Purpose. My purpose in coordinating this event is to first acknowledge January as National Human Trafficking Prevention Month. Second is also to honor human trafficking survivors, their experiences, and learn from their experiences. And finally, to learn from to learn about human trafficking from the experts in a community setting. Next slide, please. So I've introduced Marta and Bradel, and so now it is my pleasure to introduce Theresa Kennedy. She is the human trafficking, these are the rest of our panelists. So I've had the pleasure of introducing Marta and Bradel, and now it's my pleasure to introduce Theresa Kennedy, a human trafficking regional coordinator of the Department of Children and Families, the Southeastern region. Nathan Earl, he is the executive director of Arc of Freedom Alliance. Next slide, please. And Bradel, this is you.
Good morning, and it is my pleasure to introduce Katina Hernandez, who is a special agent at the Department of Homeland Security, Dr. Pat Corrales, who is a medical director at the Thrive Clinic, and Natalie Freitas, who is a senior program attorney at the Guardian ad litem, and Maria Jose Fletcher, the co-director and founder of Vida Legal Assistance, Inc.
Thank you. Okay, so what I'd like to do now, let's stop the share and let's launch a poll. So to begin our discussion this morning, I'd like to start off by launching a poll to have a better understanding as to what your role is, what the audience's role is in the anti-trafficking movement. So give me just a moment and I'm going to launch this poll. So again, what is your role in the anti-trafficking movement? And I'm going to wait just a moment for you all to answer. So we have law enforcement, healthcare providers, education and outreach, legal service providers, social service providers, survivor advocates, faith-based, and other. And 80% have voted. I'm going to wait just a little bit longer. All right, I'm going to end polling and I'm going to share the results. And so here we have it. So we have a small group of law enforcement, healthcare providers, education and outreach, legal service providers, social service providers, survivor advocates, and others. Okay, very good. And I have one more poll that I would like to share with you. So here we go. What area of human trafficking do you have the most interest in learning about? And this is just to, it gives us a good idea as to what folks are interested in. And folks are voting. So victim identification and engagement, let's see. All right, I'm going to end the poll. I'm going to share the results. So definitions and statistics, a small amount. Victim identification and engagement, 27%. Demographics of human trafficking victims, small percent. Boys, men, and the LGBTIQ+ community. And a large group at the bottom says that you're interested in all of these areas. So good to know. Okay, I'm going to stop the share results. Very good. Okay, so if the rest of the panelists could turn their videos on, I would appreciate it. And let's go ahead and get started. So give me just a moment. Here we go. So my first question is for Special Agent Katina Hernandez of the Department of Homeland Security. Hi, Katina. And for the audience in general, the Department of Homeland Security has a Center for Countering Human Trafficking. And this is the United States government's first ever integrated law enforcement center that directly supports with federal criminal investigation, victim assistance efforts, intelligence, outreach, training that are related specifically to human trafficking and forced labor. So our question to you, or my question to you, Katina, is what is human trafficking?
Hi, Deborah. Thank you for having me. And for sake of time, I'm going to give you our official agency definition. Human trafficking involves the use of force, fraud, or coercion to obtain some type of labor or commercial sex act. Traffickers use force, fraud, or coercion to lure their victim and force them into labor or commercial sexual exploitation. Now, for legal prosecution, we need to prove all of those elements of the crime unless the person is under 18 years old for sex trafficking.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Katina. What are the, and so can you break down a little bit more what are the different kinds of trafficking? So you did mention sex trafficking and so labor trafficking.
So there's sex trafficking, labor trafficking, and there's different elements within labor trafficking. We have domestic servitude, which is being forced to work, or it's actually slavery inside of a home. It's modern day slavery is what human trafficking really is. So being forced to work, do any type of labor inside of a home. Then there's field work. Then there is debt bondage, being forced to pay off a debt in which you legally don't owe, you owe the trafficker. And peonage, being treated, without being treated less than a human, basically, and having no human rights to you at all.
Thank you, Katina. Thank you for sharing. Okay.
And Katina, could you explain the differences between trafficking and smuggling?
Yeah, so I'm going to give you a little bit of our legal definition as well, just for sake of time, because I could go on. Okay, so smuggling is when a person is undocumented. Trafficking could be a citizen or an undocumented person. Smuggling, you are voluntarily, illegally crossing a border. Trafficking, you are involuntary crossing, or you could already be inside of a border. You're being forced to come over. So you're paying someone when you're smuggling. When you're trafficking, you're not. Smuggling is a crime against the border. Trafficking is a crime against a person. And smuggling is also transportation-based, and trafficking is exploitation-based.
Thank you for clarifying that.
You're welcome.
Good. Thank you, Katina. I wish we had time to ask more and more questions.
I understand.
It'll be at a different time, a different opportunity. So thank you very much. Our next question is for Theresa Kennedy. And again, Theresa, as the Human Trafficking Regional Coordinator for the Department of Children and Families for the Southeastern region of the U.S., can you share with us or describe what's the current prevalence of human trafficking here in Florida?
Sure. I just want to thank everybody again for the numbers of people who are incredible, and appreciate so many people.
We can't hear you very well, Theresa.
Now? Better?
Yes.
Okay. So just really for everybody taking an opportunity to begin their education or continue. Not working? Okay, we're going to try this. Hopefully you won't get family background. Is that better? All right. That means the teenagers have come through the roof. So in talking about the prevalence here in the state of Florida, I'm sure a lot of you know, and I may kind of lead in response to the second question, kind of look at the prevalence on both the state of Florida level and a national level. For most of you have heard that the state of Florida is one of the top 3 states in our country for the number of reports for human trafficking. It's important for us to always remember when you talk statistics, know where those numbers are coming from, and also what do they really mean. The numbers when we talk about Florida being one of the top states, that is coming from Polaris, which is the agency that mans the National Human Trafficking Hotline. When we talk locally about Florida, we have different parts of the state that tend to have a higher number of reports. I see that there's lots of people on that are from different areas, but we know that we have a lot of people here from Miami-Dade County. Miami-Dade does happen to be one of the top 3 counties in the state of Florida with the highest number of reports. And this is oftentimes something that we see with our larger counties and larger areas that have also a lot of tourist attractions. So we have Miami-Dade, Broward County, Central Florida, and also Hillsborough County. That continues to be true year after year, whether we're talking about reports from Polaris or reports specifically from the Florida Abuse Hotline. And again, when I'm speaking of numbers from the Florida Abuse Hotline, those are numbers as to minors only. We know here locally in Miami-Dade County, we tend to have a very close range from year to year, maybe about 15 to 20 cases. We tend to be anywhere from about 150 reports to 200 per year, and that would be per county.
Theresa.
Yes.
Yes, your audio is still fading in and out a little bit. Can you repeat that last portion? I know just a little.
Sure. From which part?
The last sentence. You mentioned something specifically about here in Miami-Dade County.
Yes. So in Miami-Dade County, our number of reports tend to stay pretty equal each year that we see from the total number of reports, somewhere within the range of anywhere from about 150 reports to just under 200 reports each year. And I think it's important for us to realize that a lot of the reason that we see the number of reports higher also has to do with the amount of advocacy that is done within these counties that we're talking about. The more outreach and advocacy and awareness that we're doing, the more likely people are to pick up the phone and make that call when they think that they're seeing a young person who may be.
Very good. Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Theresa.
And Theresa, could you talk about what youth are most at risk and what are some of the challenges with identifying, assisting victim survivors?
Sure. You know, I like to say before I start off with, you know, what some of those vulnerabilities may be. So remind people that any young person can be at risk at any time. But we do know that there are some specific vulnerabilities that could put a young person at a greater risk. Any young person that may have experienced trauma in their past, especially trauma that that young person wasn't given the opportunity to seek treatment and appropriate treatment, puts them at a higher vulnerability. A young person who doesn't have strong, positive adult connections in their life or positive peer connections in their life could also put them at risk. And those that we see who may, you know, have some experiences with elopement, running away, or being put out of their homes for whatever reason that may be, would also put them at high risk for, you know, individuals who then, you know, prey on them and, you know, promises that they think will absolutely, you know, change their life or make it better in some way. Really see those people filling that need for that young person. When it comes to what the challenges are, you know, I can say that one of the greatest challenges is we're talking about young people, teenagers. You're at a point in your life where you think you're invincible, you don't understand that some of the choices and decisions you're making could really be putting you in. They don't necessarily understand that there's truthfully more people in the world who don't have best intentions. So when you have a young person who's just not yet ready to engage in services, that's a challenge. Having enough services appropriate to meet the needs of the young people within our community. Know that my colleague Nathan is going to speak specifically to young men and boys. That's another area where we just don't have enough services. We have great services in our communities, not necessarily services that understand the trauma of being a survivor of human trafficking. So really, it's just being able to engage that young person and ensuring that we have the appropriate services. Often what I see is some of our greatest challenges.
Thank you so much, Theresa.
Thank you. Thank you. Our next question is for Nathan Earl. Hello, Nathan.
Hey.
Hi. So I understand that your agency or your organization, Arc of Freedom Alliance, your mission is to combat human trafficking and child exploitation, and you do this in many different ways. But something that is just a little bit different about Arc of Alliance is that you specialize in mobilizing communities to bring awareness on issues of human trafficking as it relates to historically underserved groups, such as males, such as the LGBTIQ youth, such as youth of color who are experiencing homelessness and aging out of foster care, just to mention a few. So I wish we could talk about all of them, but my question to you is something that Theresa alluded to just now. Is it, why are male victims so under-identified?
Sure. So I think there are individual barriers to to disclosure, as well as systems and service provider barriers. So at the individual level, boys simply don't see themselves as victims, and we see this around boys and girls. What compounds this with boys is that the boys are not included in the prevention education by and large. Boys are not included in the outreach messaging. And so it just compounds that the young boys will never see themselves as a victim. I think dovetailing on that is that the environment simply isn't safe. There's a lot of mistrust from male youth, in particular Black, Latinx, Native American youth, mistrust of the system. In particular, when it comes to something like exploitation and even sexual exploitation or sexualized violence, there's just a huge mistrust of the system. At the systems or the provider level, I think there's still a lack of gender inclusive screening and assessments across systems. We know that within the JACs, within juvenile assessments, there's the DJJ DCF screening tool that is gender inclusive, but we don't see screening or pre-screening that's gender inclusive within the educational system, across the system, or within healthcare. And then even when we do have a validated gender inclusive screening tool, we really have to look at the gender and race, gender bias of those who are conducting the tool. And that's a big problem. So I think the follow-up to that is just a lack of training and awareness. I think there's still a doubt, or there's still doubts that there is such a prevalence of the trafficking of boys across systems, across the community.
Thank you, Nathan.
And Nathan, we know that there's a lot of different narratives that are being put out as to what human trafficking looks like. How can we recraft a more accurate narrative of who is affected by human trafficking?
Sure, and it's a great question. Thank you so much for asking that. I think we really have to start twofold. We have to stop gendering human trafficking. We have to stop gendering a global pandemic of violence that affects anyone. How do we do that, or how do we start to do that? It's really about framing. For so long, I think we've framed human trafficking in this portrait kind of frame. This is what it looks like. This is the single incident. This is what they look like. We need to really switch that to a portrait or a landscape framing. We really need to start educating people and including in that messaging, what are the vulnerabilities? What are those social determinants of health that place a person at risk? And including that in our messaging, really being intentional on framing trafficking as a form of violence, and creating our messaging as this violence prevention. When we look at other complex social issues that have used this messaging, or this adapting their messaging, they've been able to remove any kind of gender stereotypes from the message. I think finally, those with influence within the anti-trafficking movement, those CEOs and systems levels and policymakers, they really need to take the lead and invest time, invest resources, and create a space, create time to be intentional on educating their stakeholders as well as community at large that this happens to children across the gender spectrum, and that while my agency may specialize in this and serving this one type of trafficking, be really intentional in the overall communications and the marketing, that this is just one element of a larger population.
That's so wonderful. Thank you, Nathan.
Yeah, thank you very much. We have a little extra time. I'm keeping the pulse of the time here. So Nathan, I'd like to ask you another question. What is the, how can I say it? Why is it that boys fall into sex trafficking, or are lured into sex trafficking? And is there a difference between boys and girls being lured into trafficking?
I think the one commonality with boys, with anyone being lured into sex trafficking is the vulnerability. So if you look at, the ACEs study, which is really prominent here in Florida, those adverse child experiences, those are experienced with equity, boys, girls, anyone across the gender spectrum. So if you're asking, how boys get into sex trafficking. It's homelessness, it's lack of stable supports, it's substance dependence, unaddressed mental health needs. The challenge that we see is that within these toxic families of origin, boys and girls both experience these adverse child experiences. Societal constructs around masculinity and toxic masculinity, boys are not allowed to express any of that outwardly. And so boys in general will internalize all of that trauma, which results in higher rates of substance dependency, acting out, internalizing that violence, which results in disproportionate rates of incarceration. And so the twisted irony is that boys and girls go through these same horrific experiences, can lead to trafficking. But within the juvenile justice system or within the correctional system, which resulted as that unaddressed previous trauma, that's the last place that many of these boys will ever feel comfortable reaching out or disclosing. It's very important that we have these screening and assessments in our JACs and in our DOCs, but we need to be mindful that that's going to be a very challenging initiative for any boy or man to disclose within our correctional system. And finally, Deborah and Bradel, is substance dependency. So within the traditional recovery vertical, many are taught that, oh, this happened to me because I was using drugs, when in reality, these boys are either using drugs or being pimped for drugs. And then when they find their way to a recovery program, the blame is on that young person for that, it was somehow their fault because of the drugs.
Thank you, Nathan, because that, for the individual that is not embedded in this type of work, we see it the other way around. Oh, they're using drugs, they're a bad kid, not
right.
that something has happened to them. So excellent. Thank you so much.
Yes, ma'am.
Our next question is for Dr. Pat Corrales. Dr. Corrales, it's such a pleasure to meet you. We have just, again, exchanged emails back and forth. And when I started at Kristi House, I was introduced to the Thrive Clinic. I attended a seminar there. And so you are the medical director of the Thrive Clinic of the University of Miami. And Thrive stands for Trafficking, Healthcare Resources, and Interdisciplinary Victim Services and Education. For me, that's a mouthful. Tell us what does, and it's okay, it can be a mouthful, but what is the Thrive program? What do you all do?
So in describing the Thrive program, I want to dovetail a little bit on what Mr. Earl said, because the response to trafficking has been to save the person and remove the person and have survivors and address survivors. But the emphasis really needs to be on screening to prevent. Prevention is the new buzzword in medicine now too. We're not going to wait for you to have a heart attack. We're going to go ahead and address your diet, your blood pressure, and all of those things. And I think that's really the emphasis for all of us as educators and as community leaders and service members. It's to be able to change a culture and to address the vulnerabilities, as Mr. Earl said, that lead to trafficking. This is a business for the traffickers. They're making money, so they've found a niche. For us as a culture and as a society, we need to address the social determinants of health, if you will. Thrive began primarily through our medical students who recognized a particular issue and addressed it as advocates. They happened to have a mentor in Jonelle Potter. Dr. Potter is in the Department of OB/GYN, and we were able to develop a program which addresses one of the biggest gaps in this whole issue, which is, what is the health care? How do we address the issues? Because if you have childhood trauma, and it doesn't have to be just sexual trauma. It can be a family that is in crisis. It can be substance abuse. It can be bullying. It can be a whole host of what most of us consider as small traumas that can lead to changes in the neurobiological development of children. And what ends up happening is the vulnerabilities increase, the issues of self-esteem, the issues of who's helping them increase. And there is no health care provision for members of this attack, basically. So we founded this, and we were very careful in developing the program to address trauma-informed care. It's a medical home. So we have 4 core departments that are involved: OBGYN, internal medicine, pediatrics, and psychiatry. And the 4 are staffed, if you will, in a pro bono manner by physicians and faculty. And if you need specialty care, the specialists come to the clinic. So our patients who are survivors, referred primarily by Homeland Security, the state attorney's office, Project Gold, are really people who have been rescued already, who are survivors. Some of them have been in the trade, unfortunately, for years, and some are just a matter of weeks. So we take all comers. Jackson Memorial has been essentially very proactive in providing us a free clinic area. The patients come to that area, they get checked in at that area. Everyone comes to them, so they don't have to go to a general waiting room. They don't have to see different providers. They're seeing their core providers. And we establish trust. We don't repeat the history, because that often traumatizes and re-traumatizes them to remember things. So the idea of this whole medical project is to fill in a gap, but also to do the work, if you will, of educating people to recognize and screen. Screening for trauma is very important. And I don't know about you all, but most children have to go to a physician. They have to be seen in preparation for schools, for sports, for a whole host of things. Understanding their particular vulnerabilities is really important, and the development of specific screens that can be done to pick up childhood traumas is very important. That's part of what we do. The final thing I would say about the project is we've been lucky enough to be funded by the Department of Justice and a few other philanthropic agencies. But this is really a labor of the heart. It's necessary for the healthcare profession to step up and recognize what their roles are, not just in being leaders in society and in the community, but also school nurses, healthcare providers, physicians that volunteer their time for sports exams. It's all necessarily important to address this. And so we're part of the, hopefully part of the answer.
Thank you, Dr. Pat. And that was, my next question was to ask you, how often are doctors trained in identification and engagement of human trafficking survivors or victims?
Well, we started about 3 years ago in educating the medical students in particular, because 80%, one study showed that in 2,000 patients ages 14 to 60, 80% of them had been in healthcare situation while being trafficked, and yet it was never addressed. So it's very important to realize it isn't just in the ER that you're going to see these patients. Physicians now are required as part of licensure, as are nurses, to get an hour, if you will, of human trafficking. But that's really not enough. I think it's very important to understand the impact of this trauma, especially on children. For the educators out there, if you're wondering why that student isn't paying attention, doesn't seem to be able to float in and out of what you're trying to do with them, is angry all the time, or is startled easily, It's very important to realize that the impact of trauma in childhood stays with that person for the rest of their life. And the impact can have changes in the neurobiology of a person that leads to, if we're talking about coronavirus and cytokine storms, the trauma triggers a storm of inflammatory markers, which lead to higher rates of heart disease, stroke, early death. And so that's why I think the emphasis for all of us in healthcare is prevention. We ask about allergy, we ask about safety, seat belts. We're starting to ask about guns in the home. It's very important that in our screening processes, we address social impacts on children especially.
I can't agree with you more.
Dr. Pat, thanks so much for being here with us today. I think I can speak for all local service providers that we're just grateful for the work that Thrive does. And it's something that's very needed, and thank you for the work that you do there. My question for you is, what is the role of healthcare in addressing the needs of human trafficking victims?
Well, I think the role is to not close your eyes, to see what you're seeing and begin to address it. It's also to respect the victim or survivor, if you will. Respect their choices at this point. Try to avoid the bias and judgment that many of us are prone to. We do it with interpersonal violence patients as well, but we need to recognize our own biases. The other thing is get involved. I mean, I think healthcare providers, but all of us in the community can get involved. The next time you buy a piece of chocolate, look for the fair trade label. You know, most chocolate on the west coast of Africa is child labor. Children that have been sold by their families or stolen from their families. So start participating and being part of the community. Healthcare providers in particular have a unique role. It's usually okay to tell your healthcare provider your most intimate secrets. So being non-judgmental, respecting and empowering them in their decisions. For children, you have no choice. I mean, children are vulnerable. Vulnerable adults are now being trafficked for their disability checks. So be aware of these events and just participate. We're not Superman. We're not going to go in there and save the day and take this person out of their situation. We have to realize that there are experts out there, all of you, who really know how to do this and do it well, but we can't be silent anymore. We just can't afford it as a community.
Those are really great points. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Absolutely. And I also want to mention that someone shared in the chat, they mentioned the documentary Resilience. And I don't know if you all are familiar with it, but it does talk about the 𝐴CE study. And it also talks about the work of Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris. And she's well known within the, I believe now she's the Surgeon General for the state of California. Don't quote me, but her work with screening and children who have been, traumatized, and within her office, she's a physician, is well known. So my next question is for Maria Jose Fletcher. Hi, Maria. I met Maria early on, I think maybe my first day at work at Kristi House at the Roxy Bolton Rape Treatment Center. So I want to share with you all that Maria Jose, she is one of the founding attorneys for 𝐕HTA Law, and 𝐕HTA's mission is to advance the rights of immigrant survivors. 𝐕HTA represents immigrant survivors of domestic and sexual violence, human trafficking, and other violent crimes. So my question to you to start off with, Maria Jose, is what are the needs of immigrant children and adolescent victims of trafficking?
Good morning, everyone. A pleasure to be here, and I'm learning so much very happy with the participation of everyone that I have heard so far. I think that while I was listening, I was feeling that I wanted to raise my hand and say, what about immigrant children? What about immigrant children, right? That's my expertise. I've been working with this population for over 20 years, since the late 90s, before the Victims of Trafficking and Violence Protection Act. Some of my clients testify in Congress, and some of them were 14, 15, 16. So I think when we look at the vulnerabilities, we need to add what an immigrant child may experience. And so if I'm gonna look at teenagers, my clients from Guatemala, from Chiapas, from other parts of Central America, from the Caribbean, Haitians, are children that at the age 13, 14, 15, they feel that they have to be responsible for the economics of the household. And either you're a male or a female, you are going to be pushed out of the household because of poverty, because of many siblings that need to be fed. And so either if you're a female, you're going to be pushed to find someone that will take care of you. And if you're a male, you're supposed to go and find work. And then through the past 20 years, that migration for work by a very young population also included these young women that were traveling to feed their families, right, to help. And so they find themselves in the United States, either because they cross at an early age, or they're crossing exactly for that reason. And so that vulnerability of, you know, when we talk about human trafficking, we talk about the need to work. And so along those 20 years of work with survivors of human trafficking, and looking specifically at the population of teenagers, is that we find them in domestic servitude, like Tina mentioned. We have Haitian children in domestic servitude, what we call the rest of it. And we have clients that free themselves after they're old enough, but they have lived in slavery situation, slavery-like situation for maybe 5-6 years since they were starting to be teens, or they were maybe brought into the United States when they were 8 or 9 or 10. You also see boys, and boys specifically, working in construction. And again, when we talk about opening our eyes, these very young kids working long hours, doing roofing. You know, I work with the public defender's office with the juvenile, and I had in Palm Beach, for example, they refer a case to us where this kid had fallen from the roof, and that opened a Pandora box, right? So found out that he was working, he was living with all these men in one household, and he was being forced. You know, the money was taken away from him. So you see that. You see them in agriculture. We work in Central Florida, in Immokalee, and both girls and boys are working in the fields. And I don't have the time now to go back to the history of the agricultural and the domestic work in the United States, that are two sectors of the labor market that are not as protected, where the worker is not as protected as in other sectors, right? So you find more egregious crimes committed there. And of course, the sex industry. So we had young boys and girls. And one of the things that I wanted to add to what Nathan mentioned is the LGBT community, right? We work with transgender youth, and they are more vulnerable to be captured and induced into sex acts by people that are maybe promising the money that they need to do their sex change, to get their pills, their medicines. So all of these are, I know you're asking about the needs, but I wanted to establish this other population out there. And then when we look at needs, again, feasible and what are we offering, right? The therapy, definitely the therapy to address the trauma. Don't look at that, the one event of the trafficking, but their whole history. So where does it start? You know, the history of trauma in that person. And then the need for stability. And because of this necessity to provide for the family, which doesn't click with the reality of being a child in the United States, right? So if you're considered an adult at 14 in another part of the world, how do you then you put them in the school now in 9th grade, and that person still holds a debt, right? There's towns that put together the money to send one child to the United States, and that child is going to be working and sending money back to pay for that debt. So think about that. I know I could be here like 8 hours, but maybe I stop now and you can ask what other things.
No, and as you're speaking, you know, it's also we have the cultural competency that's necessary. So when we have those children that are here, and then we put them and they're in the 9th grade, and we begin to treat them like children, they're thinking, what's wrong with this picture? Yeah. So there's, one of the things that I'm learning, and I'm constantly learning, are the many layers and complexities that are involved within human trafficking. It's not just one issue, but it is, it's like an onion, right? Mm-hmm. Thank you, Maria Jose. And I think that we will have some time to address some additional questions at the end. So I am happy about that. Bradel?
Yes. Hi, Maria. A lot of us aren't very familiar with the immigration law. Could you explain to us, under immigration law, what protections and benefits are available to address non-citizen minor victims of human trafficking?
So I'm going to try to give you a very simplistic version of what's out there, because the immigration law is very technical and changes constantly. And we are seeing the changes right now with the change of administration. I looked at who was participating, and I have very, very little law enforcement and very little legal service providers. So I'm going to be, how can I say it? I'm going to be begging everyone that is here listening today, and I'm going to be telling you that you are going to be the messenger, because my work as an immigration attorney to provide access to a victim to immigration relief depends on the work that you do, and depends on the work that law enforcement is doing also in trying to investigate and prosecute the crime. So in order to access certain benefits, that collaboration needs to exist. And I'll mention before the ones that we don't have to have a connection with law enforcement, which will be the Violence Against Women Act provides for something that we call the VAWA self-petition. And a victim of, an immigrant victim of human trafficking, a child, could be the child. And I saw on the chat also that someone mentioned parents selling the children, or parents making the children work. So the parent could be the abuser. And if the parent is the lawful permanent resident or a United States citizen, that child, we can derive the status. If the child doesn't have a status, we can derive it from that parent. So that's under the Violence Against Women Act, provisions for, it could be stepfather, an adopted parent, step parent, or biological parent. And that's one benefit available there that doesn't, we don't have to have a police report, for example, right? Then we have the special immigrant juvenile status that is for anyone under 18 where there has been adjudication of either abandon, abuse, or neglect by a judge, by a dependency judge. And you can also, you have to show also that reunification with one of the parents is not feasible. And there's other requirements, but in essence, this is again a very, and I know Theresa probably is very familiar, the Florida statute provides for Department of Children and Family to access this kind of service for children that are in the system, that could be in the dependency or juvenile system. So immigrant children. And when we look and we ask, many of them have been victims of trafficking. And then we have what a lot of you may be familiar, DACA, the Deferred Action for Children Arrivals, that children that were brought to the United States when they were very young, and if they comply with certain requirements of being in the United States for so long and studying, etc., they could access this protection. That again is something temporary. no need to have any contact with law enforcement. But then we have what we created in the year 2000 under the VTPA, the Victims Trafficking Protection Act, the U and T visas. And these two visas, we need to have some form of connection with law enforcement. The child is not required to provide that information, but at least we have to have a report with not only law enforcement, but it could be also the Department of Health and Human Services for an eligibility letter. And again, that's very technical, but I think the message is that there are protections and there are benefits available, many opportunities for us to help immigrant children that have been in situations of being trafficked and other forms of abuse. And so the idea is that in your community, wherever you are in the United States, wherever you are in Florida, that you familiarize yourself with who is an expert in immigration and victimization, not just an immigration attorney, but immigration and victimization. And that person needs to be part of your task force, needs to be part, person, agency, you know, the more the merrier, part of your group that is working against human trafficking. Yeah, and I'll stop there.
Well, thank you for that. And I really love the idea of having someone that's an expert, you know, on our MDT staffings. I think that's definitely a need. Thank you.
Thanks so much. I will have another question I wanted to ask you along those lines, Maria Jose. Do you have a cheat sheet?
Oh, yes.
Please send me a cheat sheet of some of those remedies, the legal remedies that you have, because oftentimes I'm in the community and I'm speaking and someone will mention something and I'm, yes, but I don't remember. And so I'd love to be able to have it right there available to me. So thank you very, very much. Very insightful.
I will make a plug to the Blue Campaign from USCIS. There's very good Q&A, 1-pagers, 2-pagers, and they're also good for law enforcement when we want law enforcement assistance. So please go there, and then I will send you a link to good resources that are like that, like what you're looking, cheat sheets.
Okay, thank you. And I also want to quickly plug the police officers, the law enforcement that, you know, we said that there was poor attendance today. Having said that, we just trained during the month of December, the education team did train the complete Miami-Dade County Public Schools police officer group, all of our trainings, 5 days straight. So I just wanted to share that. So yes, and absolutely necessary. And as a, you know, it takes a village. And of course, I'm preaching to the choir here. Our next question is for Natalie Freitas. There you are, Natalie. Thank you so much for being here, and it's a pleasure to meet you. So the Guardian Ad Litem is one of Kristi House's MDT's multidisciplinary team members. And throughout the years, I have heard of Grace Court. Can you share with the participants what Grace Court is?
Yes, and thank you for having me on and inviting me to be a part of this all-star panel. So Grace Court was actually the first court of its kind that specifically dedicated to addressing human trafficking. It is so let me back up and tell you what it stands for. It's also an acronym, kind of like THRIVE, so it's a mouthful. Grace, Renewal, Acceptance Through Change and Empowerment. And the idea being in 2016, when that name officially launched, take away the negative stigma that's associated with human trafficking. So we don't call it HT Court, we don't call it human, it is Grace Court. It is a court in Miami-Dade County, which is the 11th Judicial Circuit, and it specifically hears dependency and cases, as well as companion family law cases that have a human trafficking component. Dependency cases are those children are under the supervision of the Department of Children and Families, the state and court system to be protected to abandonment or neglect. They came to the attention of the Department of Children and Families thanks to the mandated reporters, such as the educators that we have on the call, or the health professionals who were aware of abuse and called it into the Department of Children and Families. Delinquency cases are those where children are have committed delinquent acts. So anytime that there's concern that one of the children in those types of cases either was a victim of human trafficking or is at high risk of being a human trafficking victim, those cases come to that division of the Dependency and Delinquency Court under currently the Honorable Angelica D. Zayas. And one judge who is trained in human trafficking hears those cases. It's a therapeutic and trauma-informed court. So everyone who's involved in these cases understands and has in anti-trafficking work, understands of human trafficking. And that way, as a collaborative group, we address all the issues that come up within these cases that are results of the human trafficking. So Citrus also has a Miami Cares project that helps to coordinate all of the behind the scenes staffing. Bradel mentioned the MDT, or I'm sorry, Deborah mentioned MDT. All the kind of discuss how to best support these cases. And we present that information in court as part of the delinquent dependency cases.
Okay. Thank you, Natalie.
And Natalie, I've seen you in action in the courtroom and witnessed the amazing work that guardian ad litem does for these youth. Could you explain the role of guardian ad litem in HT cases and human trafficking cases?
Sure. So the guardian ad litem program is tasked by the Florida statutes to represent the best interests of children on their dependency cases in court. So the guardian ad litem program on the HT cases, we do the same thing, only that our staff is also trained in the red flags and knowing what happens, what is human trafficking, so that when they do make the best interest recommendations, it's well informed. The guardians who are part of a team, so it includes staff guardian ad litems, and then myself as a program attorney on that team, as well as the guardian ad litem supervisor. And together we help come by talking to the child's therapist, the child's counselors, the child's foster parents, all of kind of the people around this child to figure out to determine what is in the best interest of this child and make sure that that's represented to the court at all times. And so that the guardian speaking to the case manager, being a part of all the staffings that include all the providers such as Kristi House, such as the Chance Program, such as Survivors Pathways, etc.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, so, and I'd like to add one more question for Natalie. So Natalie, what interventions are available for human trafficking victims through dependency court?
Yeah, so all of we want to make sure that they have all their needs are met. So medical, psychological, educational, substance abuse. We did hear earlier about substance abuse dependencies that also affects victims of human trafficking. Immigration relief, as we heard earlier from Maria Jose Fletcher. So all of those, through dependency, we make sure that all of that is being addressed and taken care of. We ask about it in court. The judge is going to ask, well, what's going on with school? And so the different services that are presented are through the child welfare system, but in collaboration with the community partners, such as Kristi House Educaiton. There's Chance also provides services. I mentioned Survivors. We make children are also taken, and Thrive Clinic. That's also a recommendation to make sure that they're getting that medical attention geared towards human trafficking survivors. And I mentioned also substance abuse services. So all of those services are provided through the child welfare system to the families and to the children. Through dependency, because the family is also the families also has a case with the dependency system. The court is also able to order the family to participate in certain services. So family therapy, therapeutic visitation, and sometimes even having the parents or the future caregivers learn about what is CSEC. What does it mean that my child was a human trafficking, or what my child is at risk of human trafficking? What is human trafficking? And I know that's some of the psychoeducation that we refer the cases to Kristi House to learn about, so that they're better equipped when the children are reunified back with their families, if they're able to be reunified in a safe manner. So the dependency court puts together the pieces to make sure that the children and the families have access to those services that they may not have had access to otherwise.
Very okay, interesting. Thank you for painting the rest of the picture for me. It's quite interesting. I'm learning a lot here today. Before we go on, I have questions. Our next questions are for Marta and for Bradel, but we do have some time flexibility, and there's one question, but I'm not too sure who would be the appropriate person to answer it. So I'm just going to put it out there, and and you all can tell me. So it has to do with coordinated response, and I'm just curious to know, how do agencies work together, whether it's in the sting operation, referring services, as to to victims of human trafficking? How does it work for the lay person? So you can explain this to the lay person. I don't know if Maria Jose would like to take it, or Katina. How does it?
So the question is for a lay person. They are seeing human trafficking and they want to know what to do, or how to coordinate, or how to get help, or who they call first.
Yes.
Okay.
So,
well, I don't know if everybody else would agree with me, but for me, I always tell everybody to call the hotline, and the hotline, the Polaris Project, will disseminate that to law enforcement, state and local, federal, all the NGOs. That, to me, that is the best way, unless they know a law enforcement officer or someone from an agency, they can call them directly. Those are one of two options. I always leave the line open to call me. If the victim is not ready to speak to law enforcement, I pass it on to one of our NGO partners. So you just gauge it like that. But whatever is their most comfortable way of contacting, either the hotline or directly to a person that they know.
Thank you, Katina. I appreciate that.
If it's okay, if you can hear me. I just would also want to encourage that if we are speaking about a minor, sometimes calling the Florida Abuse Hotline can get faster response, only because when it goes to Polaris, it does come down to the law enforcement. It will also be sent to the Florida Abuse Hotline, but there could be 24 or 48-hour difference for a child protective investigator. So if it is a minor, and I'm saying this just because there are so many school personnel involved in our call today, that Florida Abuse Hotline, when we're speaking maybe a faster way to get that response. But there is, if you ever are in a situation where you're seeing something happening, that call to law enforcement might really be your best bet if it's something that parking lot happening. Always keep yourself safe. Call law enforcement. That Florida Abuse Hotline call would likely be the fastest way to get an investigator from the child abuse side to the assignment. And we always coordinate with law enforcement in that criminal investigation.
Great.
Thank you, Teresa.
Yeah, very good. Thank you. Yes, Maria.
I'm sorry, I put the abuse hotline number in the chat if anybody needs that, piggyback on what Teresa mentioned.
Very
Perfect. Thank you, Natalie. Maria?
Yeah, I wanted to add, because of what I mentioned earlier about the difficulty in adapting to the legal system in the United States coming from other countries. So for immigrant children, there are agencies that are specifically funded to address and accompany minors and also victims of human trafficking, such as ours. And so sometimes it's important that the person gets legal advice before they move forward with any other steps. And I'm not talking about, egregious cases of abuse where, you know, you have to contact the abuse hotline, but more on the cases of maybe a 16, 17-year-old that is working in a household. And I have seen these cases where they are in Aventura or, you know, and they're cleaning, cooking, taking care of children. And really for them, this is a benefit, and they don't find themselves, and we see that across the board, they don't find themselves as, you know, they don't see themselves as victims. This is what they've seen their mothers, aunts, grandmothers do. And so we get the call, and they're very afraid, and they don't want to lose their job, and they don't know what's going to happen if they're sent back home. So we spend some time with them now virtually, but in the past in person, and we give them this array of options that are legally, you know, everything that they can get and the services that are out there. And once they feel comfortable, then we accompany through the process of reaching out to law enforcement. And that would be in those cases when maybe a Good Samaritan, we had a case where someone came to clean carpets in a household and discovered this case. So they brought the person to our, you know, a very young woman, you know, that borderline, what's the difference, 17, 18, 19, right? They're young, they bring their own situations. And so we talk to them and it put them at ease on, you know, I think the whole issue for us as service providers is developing trust, and not only service providers, but law enforcement too. How do we develop the trust of someone that has been defrauded and coerced and abused much of their life?
Very good. Thank you. All right. Yes, Dr. Pat.
So I would just want to reiterate that a lot of these kids and adults find their way into emergency rooms. And so broken bones, bruises all heal, but recognizing it is something that we've dedicated to training ER docs and personnel to understand, even the clerks, you know, the very attentive older person who comes and pays in cash is not somebody to be glad to see. So it's very important that these areas are covered in education. I would include school nurses and school health clinics as a related site to train the personnel as to pick it up and to call the abuse hotline or call law enforcement to again acknowledge what they're seeing.
That's a great point, Dr. Pat, especially due to the fact that we know the majority of human trafficking victims at one point or another have crossed the path of medical care staff. So that is a great point. Education is very important.
Good. You all have brought up some great points. Thank you, Theresa, for bringing that up, and Maria Jose and Katina as well. Thanks. So I'm going to move forward with some questions for Marta and Bradel of Project Gold. So Marta is the director of Project Gold. And again, this is Kristi House's drop-in center. So Marta, how can we best engage with sexually exploited children?
Hi, everyone. So how can we best engage with sexually exploited children? I think first and foremost, their basic needs have to be met, which I think most of the time will include food, shelter, clothes, as well as their medical treatment. I think many times people will try to focus on crisis counseling or asking about their stories immediately. And these types of things like their food, shelter, clothing, medical are types of things that actually led them into exploitation. So I think really making sure that those things are met first is really important. Not focusing on their history of exploitation. You know, I think knowing that what made them vulnerable many times was their history of abuse, whether that was domestic violence, whether they were living in homes with substance abuse, whether they themselves experienced sexual abuse. So, you know, making sure that those things are also identified and met, and that they're receiving the appropriate treatment for that. That doesn't mean that someone should go into that immediately as far as services are concerned. You know, that might not be where they are at the moment. Many times they've already been through various different types of services, and they need time, to work up to that. Best practices at this point is also reflecting that having survivor mentors as the first point of engagement, I think is really important in order to assist them in feeling understood. So, I think those are some of the things I think that everyone needs to remember when they're thinking about engagement.
Okay, great, thank you. And what can we do to further support survivors?
I can say a lot about that. So I think, first it's making sure that we're educated, not just educating ourselves on CSEC with children or human trafficking in general, but really educating ourselves on survivors and what are the needs for survivors in the community. I think we're at a point in time where we're lucky that the government is supporting grants to employ survivors, which is wonderful. But I think even organizations in the community still try to almost pigeonhole survivors, even when they come in to organizations and placing them in positions of just speaking about their story, about their history. There's so much more to survivors. They are experts. They have the lived experience, but they also possess strengths and talents and so many things that organizations can benefit from. So allowing them to spread their wings and expand themselves and grow into different aspects of organizations, I think is incredibly important. And organizations have to be very trauma informed in order to do that and educate themselves first to support survivors, because if they don't do that, there will be, a turnover rate and survivors won't be able, to maintain their employment in their positions. So I think also keeping in mind equal pay, for survivors, I think is incredibly important. A lot of survivors, because of their history of trafficking, might have issues where they haven't finished their educational degrees. They may have criminal charges due to forced criminality. So making sure, that just as a result of those things, we are allowing them to be equally paid and employed. And as I said, really expressing their talents and growing into even administrative leadership positions. We're blessed here at Project Bold that we have an incredible team now of 4 survivor mentors. And, we have leaders that contribute to our policies and our decisions in so many different ways.
Well, awesome. Thank you, Marta. Thank you. I do, within education, I'm always reaching out to the NCTSN, the National Children's Traumatic Stress Network, and gathering information from their website. And I noticed that when they deal with, or when they are addressing an issue, they always take a look. They say, they take a look at the event or the experience before it happens. And so they say we must prepare for trauma before it happens. We need to look at the situation while it's happening, and then we also need to look at it after it's happening. And as I am learning, I say the same thing with human trafficking. Before, what can we do to prevent? What are the socioeconomic things that are happening within our society and our culture that cause it to happen, like the vulnerabilities? What can we do to prevent? While it's happening, how can we best prepare ourselves to support and engage and identify, to support our youth and trafficking persons? And then after, once they have been removed from the life, or once they have chosen to leave the life and they have chosen to rebuild in whatever way, that shape or form that looks like, how can we best serve? And some of the things that you have mentioned, and I know that some of the, I guess the projects that you all have implemented in Project Gold. So definitely I am definitely a work in progress and learning. So it's interesting and to say the least. So Bradel, my next question is for you, and it's this training. How can we best train? What are the best practices to onboard survivors?
That's a great question.
Yes, yes, thank you. Go ahead.
Well, firstly, I think, knowing the difference between being trauma informed versus trauma responsive, that's something I'm very adamant about is that, you can learn to do something, but if you're not using the tools that you've learned, then you're not trauma responsive, you just know the things. So being trauma responsive is really important because there are a lot of triggers, and it's just important to be mindful of how you engage. Secondly, trainings are really important, both for the survivor and the organizations. And it's also important for those to keep in mind that there are survivors that don't have any job experience within corporations or organizations, so things, not understanding things like maybe chain of command and simple things like that. Doesn't mean that they're ill-equipped for the job whatsoever. There are things that maybe you've learned with your history that they might not have learned yet, and it's simple as just learning it. And vice versa, there's things that they know within their history that you might not know. So it doesn't make them less than or ill-equipped for the job. It's just, being mindful of what they might not have learned and being patient through that process of onboarding, being patient, teaching, training the survivors and also the organization itself. It's also really important to make sure that the survivors that are employed there are comfortable. If they're not comfortable within the space, there's instances of maybe feeling scolded or just to give examples, scolded or feeling less than, which are, we have a partnership with FIU, and I did a study with them, on some of the things that are happening with survivors in the movement, working in the movement, some of the things that maybe aren't going so right within their employment, and a common one was as being treated less than. But when a survivor is employed in an organization and they feel comfortable, you're less likely going to have that turnover rate. It's also really important for supervisors and leaders within the organization to be working side by side with the survivors. And again, to have them feel comfortable and to be working with them and teaching them the things that they need to learn for the job and making sure that they get the trainings that they need. Yeah, I mean, I could go on and on.
Thank you, Bradel. Appreciate it. My next question is the training for onboarding of survivors in organizations. What thoughts do you have around that?
Right, so I have done some research, and there really aren't a lot of survivor trainings, that teach survivors about their role, like for example, how to be a mentor. There's no trainings about like the onboarding process, challenges, how to maneuver through them, office politics. There's just no great amount of trainings. I could count them on one hand and not even use my fingers. So it is a great need nationally. So I started working on a curriculum that trains both the survivors and the organizations. As I mentioned earlier, I think it is very important, not just for the survivors to be trained, but the organizations to be trained on best practices as well. It creates more cohesion and a better working environment for both parties. And so that's what I've been working on. I think it's a great need throughout the entire nation, and there's just not enough of it.
Awesome, very good. Thank you. Yes, Dr. Pat.
I just want to mention one of the sequelae of being a trafficking survivor, and that's the incidence of chronic PTSD. The numbers are rather significant, actually more than war veterans. And so especially if it was childhood at the beginning, the PTSD symptoms can unfortunately be masked in the sense that we talked about the fact that they dissociate, they seem to not be emotionally involved, they easily startled, they're easily angered, they have trouble, if you will, fitting in. And so addressing those particular events and symptoms is important to the long-term future of a lot of these human trafficking survivors. So I would mention again, there are ways to screen for it, and there are therapies for it, and it's we're learning how to do that. And you know, if you're trying to hold a job or go to school or you know, reintroduce yourself to family life, those things will interfere. And so it's important to address them up front as well.
Thank you. Thanks, Dr. Pat. I appreciate that. Yes, Katina, please. We have time.
Sorry, I had to cut mine short because I'm used to doing, you know, as you guys know, one of these. We're all used to doing one of these probably like in 2 hours. And I just want to reiterate and let our audience know how lucky they are and how valuable this training is, that there's all these people who play a role in the survivor's life, from whether the time they get out and to forever. And it's really, really does take a village to work with these survivors and to help them. And sometimes it's like an addiction. They can relapse, they go back, and then they come back, and we're always here for them when they come back. It doesn't matter, especially Thrive Clinic. Once you are a survivor of trafficking and you enter that clinic, you can be out of the life for the rest of your life. I have survivors that still go there, and I've worked with them 8 years ago. But I just, that was something I want to add. But what I wanted to add from my questions, because I did see something in the chat. Smuggling and trafficking, also the difference. So when it turns into trafficking is when, yes, someone comes over here and they're participating in the smuggling act. And once they come here, they're fraudulently told to work at anything. And that's another part of labor trafficking. I mentioned domestic servitude and field work. You can work in checkers and someone can take your whole paycheck, and that's labor trafficking. So when someone is coerced or fraudulently pulled into work in a situation or do anything against their will, and they're not receiving any funds for it, it can easily turn from smuggling to trafficking. So those two things, smuggling, yes, can turn into trafficking. And yes, when you're, to answer the question, when you come over voluntarily, and then let's say your documents are taken away, or you're being held against your will, or you have to pay off a debt, that's when it is trafficking. And labor trafficking can happen anywhere. Can happen anywhere where you're making money and you're not receiving any. I had a victim, a survivor who I recovered, who worked in a strip club, and she did not engage in any sex acts. She danced, and she turned over all her money to her trafficker. She refused to engage in prostitution, and that was a labor trafficking case. So I just wanted to add to that too.
Deborah, can I say something as well? So I just also wanted to mention, you know, as Katina said, you know, we do have an incredible panel here, and all of us work extremely closely together. And when it comes to engagement as well, I think knowing and, you know, who the community partners are that are specialized in minors, that are specialized in adults, that are specialized in males, that are specialized in LGBTQ. And as Bradel pointed out, are not just trauma informed, but trauma responsive. We're living in a time where, you know, human trafficking is a very hot topic, and, you know, a lot of, it became a very political issue. Trafficking is a bipartisan issue, you know, rather than one party affiliated, you know, and I think really doing the research, because because it's such a hot topic, a lot of different organizations and people can pop up saying that they work with trafficking victims, that they rescue trafficking victims, and they're putting out different images that are unfortunately really don't depict what trafficking really is. So doing your research for your local communities that are involved. If you don't know, you know, try to ask the child advocacy centers, ask task forces, ask law enforcement task forces, and really find out, you know, what are the organizations, and the organizations that are doing the correct training, you know, and the correct education out there. so that you can sign up for the appropriate education, and you can educate others out there that are unfortunately putting out the wrong messages. When those wrong messages are out there, it hurts the survivors, it hurts the victims, and it hurts the work that everyone is doing every day to work hard to make sure that the children and any adult survivor out there is getting the services they need.
Great point. I had muted myself. Thank you, Marta. Before we begin taking the questions from the audience, we do have a little bit of time, and I'm very happy with that. I have a couple of questions that I want to ask in regards to outreach, because that's what I do, education and outreach. And so, but before I ask the question about outreach, I have a question for Bradel. Bradel, how can we best go from being trauma-informed to trauma-responsive?
Firstly, going to trainings to learn the tools of being trauma-informed. But like anything else, putting those tools in action. I also think it's important to refresh on those kind of trainings. I think that it would be good to have protocols in place for organizations that their employees go once a year for trauma-informed trainings, and maybe they're not the exact same trainings every year as well. So they get a variety of different trainings on being trauma-informed, and I think it would be great if, you know, trainings could also include consultations, you know, so that's often needed when people are putting things into practice, but it's to actually use the things learned in practice.
That's great. And also, and along those lines, as I'm listening to you, I think also having the trainings, you know, have it be survivor-led as well, those trainings.
Oh, absolutely.
Sure. Okay. Thanks. Thank you. So I wanted to talk a little bit about outreach. And so I've been, with the whole advent of the pandemic, my work as an outreach person has changed significantly, because now my world has gone virtual. Taking that into consideration, and just outreach in general, when we are working face-to-face, what are some of the missed opportunities to provide that providers may have, and maybe that the community at large can have, that we fail to connect with survivors? Anyone can answer. So I'll repeat it because it may be a little bit long-winded. What are the missed opportunities that providers have to connect with survivors? I can't hear you. Theresa, we can't hear you.
Okay, I'm bringing it real close. Sorry that I look so in your face now. Can you hear me a little bit better?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I think one of the things that probably everybody on here would agree with is the marketing, what it is that we're putting out there. That if we are trying to do outreach, we need to be thoughtful about the communities that we're in. Oftentimes we see the face of a blonde-haired, blue-eyed white girl with ropes and chains. Can't believe we still see it, or duct tape, or something foolish like that. And the reality is, you don't need to have a person on a poster. You don't need anything like that. We need to be respectful. We need to recognize that by doing something like that, you may be turning a young boy away. You may be turning a Black woman away, just because they're saying, you know, already feeling like this agency is not considering me, not thinking about me. So really being thoughtful and respectful of the messaging that we're putting out there when we're trying to reach out to different people.
I agree. And to piggyback on that, you know, if I look at human trafficking and the types of human trafficking as a pie chart, and if you're doing ropes and chains, like you're doing a sliver of the pie chart of what is human trafficking. And also, you know, many survivors or victims do not realize that they've experienced human trafficking even well after leaving the situation. So when you're putting out these narratives and you're putting out these pictures of what human trafficking looks like, I mean, if someone who's of color, for example, and is a male, is going to see an image like that, it doesn't resonate with that individual, and it's hard to, it doesn't help them realize that, oh, well, maybe that's what I experienced. So it's extremely counterproductive.
Can I add something to that, Bradel, as well? You know, you mentioned those messaging. One of the things we know about those outreach messaging, if a male survivor or as a male that's experienced victimization, part of that is because I was victimized, this made me gay, or this makes me less of a man. And so when we're in the community, that guy's in the community, and that's the messaging that he sees is the girl, that further internalizes those feelings of shame, and that whatever happened to me made me less of a man or weak, or that this made me gay. And that's a reality that we have to be more responsible with the media. And along those same lines, we also need to be really mindful that only about half of the male victims of sex trafficking identify as LGBTQ. And so if I'm a heterosexual male that's been victimized, I mean, all I'm seeing again are the rainbow flags on the outreach messaging. That also can internalize those conflated feelings that because this happened to me, this made me gay. Aside from the fact that if I don't identify with the rainbow flag, then I'm not going to resonate. That message isn't going to resonate me. So Deborah, to your question about those missed opportunities, when we're engaging with underserved male populations, it's important to realize that even within the LGBTQI spectrum, there's sexual orientation and gender expression. So a trans female could be a male or a female identifying either way, but to make that distinction and to curate and target your messaging around that. And then finally, the other, I think, opportunity, realizing that from our studies and research supports that 80% of our survivors are going to present with substance use disorder. So just that statistic alone, we need heavy outreach, assertive outreach within the addiction treatment vertical, from our assertive street outreach to the sober homes to our treatment for our treatment facilities, as well as our healthcare settings, that when someone's presenting with a substance dependence disorder, that can be an indicator of exploitation.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So what I'm hearing you all say is that we have to be careful with the images that we use. We have to be careful with the wording that we use. How about cultural sensitivity and outreach? What could someone who's from the USA versus someone from Central America, what would our outreach material look like from one country to the other? Is there a difference? Should there be a difference?
Okay.
Yes, please.
I think that first and foremost is the message that regardless of where you are from and regardless of your immigration status, if you have been victimized, you have a right to access the legal system in the United States, and you're going to be protected. And when we talk about labor trafficking specifically, that also labor laws apply to you. And it may be, if we're, I think that I remember in the late 90s that the Department of Justice with the Department of Labor issue a poster where it said, and this is prior to the VTPA, but it was addressing labor exploitation, and it said, you have a right to get paid if you're working, regardless of your situation, right? How? And so that was very powerful. It was in English and Creole and Spanish. Here we used it a lot. And then there's also a campaign that was done by the Department of Health and Human Service early 2000s, where the posters had children working in the fields, teenagers working in the fields from different parts of the world, boys and girls projected, right? Same thing. So all these images of indigenous populations that they saw themselves in the posters. I go back to what everybody's saying. It's like, you need to see yourself in the population and the services that are being provided. I think that right now with I think COVID has created a very, you have all the bad that COVID has brought to us, but also we started communicating with clients more and more through this medium. And we assume, us working with immigrants, that they didn't have the knowledge or they didn't have the access to the phones and the WhatsApp, and we were wrong, right? We were wrong, and they're very savvy. And so how do we use that to protect them, to prevent, to give them access to services? It's a challenge for, we work in the response, we work in the crisis. We are not doing, the prevention that we do is through education, but I think for organizations that are spending resources in prevention, this is where you need to look at, right? How to educate kids in the schools, and as early as, 2-year-olds have iPads. 2-year-olds know how to move that iPad around and do it. So how early we start with the prevention part through that, and what is the message that we're sending?
That's a great point, and along those lines, and that's something that I wanted to mention. Like, I know that when I go into elementary and high schools, particularly elementary, first graders, second graders, sexual abuse is happening, but they don't know that it's abuse. They just see it as a behavior. They don't know that it's something that it is. They get a feeling in their tummy. They know something is wrong, but they don't know that, again, that it is abuse until they are educated. And so I second you, and I echo you, Maria Jose, about when we're talking about labor laws. And so a lot of times you can have adults coming into the United States not understanding that what is going on is illegal. And so it is an opportunity for outreach to ensure that we are sharing with the community, what their rights are.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Dr. Pat, you wanted to share something.
I think once identified, organizations and individuals that are responsive to survivors have to understand that culture is not a barrier. It actually is a strength. It's something that we have to tap into and learn more about our patients, our clients, because trauma response has got to be in the language, and I don't mean just the spoken language, but really in the cultural language of our survivors. If we ignore it, we're not engaging appropriately. If you can imagine what it's like to interview somebody over Zoom, or even do a conference like this over Zoom, think about delivering health care over a media like this. We've had to adapt, and believe it or not, the ability, flexibility, if you will, of our survivors has been really reaffirming to us. They like the fact that they don't have to physically come out of their home or whatever in order to do essentially a video conference with the doctor or a telephone call. It's more convenient, it's more efficient, and they feel safer. And actually, in the beginning, when we first started making appointments, we learned the traditional way of making appointments just didn't work. So actually creating telephone appointments and texting worked a lot better. And the final point I want to make is, in terms of the mental health issue, counseling and group support over a Zoom conference like this actually is quite supportive, and peer support and can be quite effective in treating some of the feelings they have. To hear somebody else say they have the same feelings and the same fears is actually quite unique. We're going to look at the adaptation, if you will, of healthcare delivery in the next few years. I don't think we're going to go back to the traditional picture. But I think culture is very important. It makes no sense to give somebody a diet that's not consistent with their life and their family and their ability to do it and think it's going to work. Same thing with medications. If you think that giving somebody a blood pressure pill works 100% of the time, when they believe that tea and herbs are much more effective, that really is not adapting to our clients and our patients. So.
Thank you. I love that, that our culture doesn't have to be a weakness, but the differences in our culture are a strength. Absolutely. Thanks. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to go ahead and begin to take some questions from the audience. And Joe and Patricia have sent Bradel, you and I in the chat, a list of some of the questions. And so we have, fortunately we have more time than I expected. We may be ending a little earlier if it's all right with you all. So we'll just sort of see how it flows. And let's see, so I'm going to, thank you, Joe and Patricia, for the questions. I really appreciate it. And Jessica too. So I'm scrolling through here. Give me just a moment. So for the LGBTI, yes. Okay, so I'm scrolling through here. So victim engagement and identification, LGBTQ+. Is there a screening that would help separate family, emotional, physical, and sexual abuse versus CHT? And I'm assuming that CHT is child human trafficking or commercial sexual exploitation. Nathan, would you feel comfortable taking a swing at that one?
Sure. If I understand the question, is there a specialized screening tool for LGBTQI families or to detect?
Excuse me, I'm sorry. My bad. I read it incorrectly. So victim identification and engagement. So is there a screening that would help separate family, emotional, physical, and sexual abuse versus commercial sexual exploitation?
I know if I'm understanding the question, I know there are LGBTQ inclusive screening. I think it would go back to that landscape view of who's administering the tool. So who is administering that screening? Are they asking the right questions? Are they culturally competent? Are they practicing cultural humility to identify and know the nuances between an LGBTQ caregiver, LGBTQI youth? I don't know of any specific screening tools specific to delineate that. I think it really goes into asking those deep questions, having having knowledge of the background of the young person, the cultural nuances within the LGBTQI community. Others may have some additional.
Okay, thank you, Nathan. Anyone else want to talk about that a little bit? No? All right. Bradel, you want to ask?
There's a question here. And I think this would be a good one for you, Marta, as LCSW. What is the correct response or correct way to work with someone who doesn't believe they are a victim?
Well, I mean, I think it's very common in the work that we do and what we see here at Project Gold, with the girls that we work with, that many of them, when they come in, do not realize that they have actually been exploited. So I think everyone remembering that, again, it takes time and not necessarily shoving it down their throat that they have been exploited. Just meeting them where they are initially, and then little by little, I think what's wonderful about Project Gold and the drop-in center that we offer here is that we do provide a sense of community in the drop-in center. As Dr. Corrales had mentioned, that sense of community and peer-to-peer understanding. Not only do we have the survivor mentors, but we do have various different types of groups. And within these groups, they are educated and they're given life skills and a lot of different tools that are needed. And so I think then in time within those education groups, they do kind of come around and eventually not just realize, the different levels of exploitation that they may have experienced, but little by little it starts to allow them to feel comfortable as they start to share, as others start to share around them. And that does at times open them up to, to therapy. But these groups and this community and all the different things that they're able to receive in that sense of community really help them.
Thanks, Marta. I think that was really well put. Theresa, I think this is a good one for you. Are DCF investigators trained on how to properly communicate with victims once they go to the homes and further assess?
Sorry, I just had to warn my mom not to make any noise in the kitchen. So yes, there is absolutely training that is required for both child protective investigators who will be assigned cases with the maltreatment of human trafficking, as well as case managers who will be carrying cases of youth that are suspected or verified of human trafficking. 6-hour training that was created by the Department of Children and Families, that myself and the criminal justice coordinator help provide that training. And really what it does is it goes over a lot of the things that we've talked about today, but there is also that component about screening and looking at how to really engage these young people. Bring in providers, oftentimes from Citrus Chance program is one of the providers that will come in and do motivational interviewing, overview when it comes time for us to actually do the training on the screening tool, to help our investigators to understand how to work with these young people different than some of your other types of investigators. They are also required to do ongoing annual training. But I will say there's probably never enough. There are times that we come across some staff that just don't seem to necessarily be the best fit for these type of investigations. And a lot of us who are involved in some of the staffings that we hold on these cases will make a point of saying something. It's important for us to realize that they are the first people often to engage with these young people, and if it's not done the right way, we may lose an opportunity to connect that youth with appropriate services.
Thank you. And I think it's so great to know that, you know, they are going through extensive training, a 6-hour training. And then I was going to ask, but you answered for me, like, is it ongoing? And I mean, that's great. I think it's really important, especially because they're usually the first point of contact, you know, and they need to be equipped in engaging with the youth and what to ask and how to ask. So I think that's really great. There's another question on here, which I think is a really important one for everyone, whether you're a service provider or not, especially if you have kids. What social media platforms are traffickers using? A lot of youth are on TikTok, and I was wondering if that is being used to lure youth into HT. And I'd love for other people to join in and answer this. I'll say that, yes, there are a lot of apps and that people and predators and traffickers are using to prey on underage children. TikTok is one of them. Snapchat is a really, really big one, especially because there's a feature on there where you can look for people in your general area. Plenty of fish, like dating sites is another one. Instagram, Facebook. I mean, I think it's important to be mindful of really any application or any website that has that interactive feature. There's even a game that Among Us, yeah, there's this game, and on the app itself, it is interactive. And I went to look on there just to sort of investigate and see what it was, and there were 13-year-olds, who knows, saying the most inappropriate things. And then it comes with a whole separate app you can download that's more interactive, and you can really chat one-on-one with people. And so I think it's important to be mindful of really anything that's very interactive, because you don't know who's on the other end, and you don't know what their intentions are or why they're talking to a youth, or if they themselves even truly are a youth. So
Nathan, I think you mentioned an app, Tagged app. I hadn't heard of that one.
Tagged was identified by Courtney's House out of DC, specifically for males, or the high incidence of males.
There's also Fortnite, which, you know, they're, you know, male kids or adults. And I've also heard of people recruiting or trying to recruit on OfferUp, like where you sell merchandise, any type of app, any type of interaction that two people can possibly meet or chat, I wouldn't put anything past any app. The most important thing is just monitor your children's apps and what they're watching and who they're using, what they're using and who they're speaking to. Even as young as a 2-year-old watching YouTube. I have my granddaughter, my daughter is constantly like over watching what she's watching on YouTube Kids, and there's some disturbing things that people put out there for kids to watch, like the way they play with dolls and stuff like that. So even in other languages. So, I mean, besides English. So just watch and monitor everything. And it's sad that we do have to do that because it's, as parents, we have so many other things going on, but we do have to make that a priority.
I think it's so important, just based on what everyone has said, you know, these apps, we can shut down an app, you can shut down a site, just as quickly as you do that, another one's created. And you're right, we've seen it on Plenty of Fish, Tinder, you know, all of these, anywhere there's a two-way communication and you have a vulnerable young person, right? So I think it's so important that we invest in that prevention education in our schools, you know, those middle schools or even younger. Because we really need to teach young people and equip them, empower the supply, I always say, with the knowledge that they need to protect themselves and those critical thinking skills before and while they're using, you know, these different apps and this different technology.
Absolutely.
Just one more little thing, because I try to remind people when I do trainings, is thinking that if you tell your kids you can't, you're not allowed to be on that, you can't play that game. Doesn't mean that they're not on their friend's phone or they're not on their friend's computer. So really, again, as Nathan just said, that education and prevention, helping your kids and the kids that we're working with within our communities, what those risks are, and really, you know, sharing with them how easily fluid into something that they weren't expecting is important because, you know, they're going to play games, they're going to do these things, and you know, maybe it'll be on a device that you can check, but empowering them with that information and that education is what's going to keep them.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. And also reporting. So when we see these strange things that are happening on social media and on the apps, so please remember to report it to the cyber tip line, right? You can click on the app and you can report it right there to let the security of the app know, but also report it to the cyber tip line. I have a question here, and it says, how can someone pursue work in this field? How can I keep myself engaged in human trafficking or get engaged in human trafficking work?
I'm happy to answer. We get a lot of questions, obviously, about people coming in and working here at Project Gold at the Drop-In Center. So, you know, first and foremost, I think people, again, educating yourself in the community and taking all of these types of trainings and really learning and getting, you know, the different certificates that are out there, I think is incredibly important. And then really, you know, trying to identify what is your goal, what is it that you're looking, you know, to do. You know, some people kind of get in the mindset that they're going into this work and it is to rescue somebody. We don't rescue anybody, they rescue themselves. And I think that's really incredibly important to remember. And if that's what you're looking for, this is not the work for you. It's incredibly challenging. Every single one of us here that is on this panel, we work together, we cry together, we call each other with very difficult cases, and we try to, you know, to collaboratively work as a team. But if you have an interest in the mental health field, you know, obviously, really trying to do internships if you can to really see, I think, is this, you know, what I'm looking for with the specialized organizations that are out there, you know, whether it's mental health or case management. If you like to volunteer, you know, really looking and trying to call anybody here that's on these different panels and possibly trying to volunteer for the organization in ways that are consistent, that are reliable, I think is important. And working with survivors, consistency and reliability is really what's most important. But if anybody does have interest or questions, we are here, at Kristi House, and you can reach out to us. You can reach out to me, and we're happy to answer questions for any interest that you might have in the field. So we make sure that we're guiding you in the right direction.
Could I also add to that? I asked the same question many years ago when I started learning trafficking, and Barbara Martinez, an attorney prosecuted these cases, shared with me an answer that was very helpful to me. So I want to share that with you. To think about, like Marta mentioned, how you want to help, where your goal is, what side do you want to be on the prosecution side or on the victim survivor side. We've heard a lot from a lot of people on this call, as you could probably tell with the side that I chose, right, is on the survivor side, helping the survivors to become survivors, taking them from the victim to survivor. And that can be through mental health, through service providers. We heard a lot about from Dr. Pat, and there are different human trafficking survivors have a variety of needs. So there are a variety of ways that you can help. So there's, as I mentioned, the service providers can be mental health, they could be medical if you're a nurse or a counselor or a doctor, looking at the ways, what organizations are working with human trafficking survivors in your field. If you're an attorney like myself, you can reach out. I'm happy to speak with you if you want to reach out to me. You can be working with the Guardian program, with the Department of Children and Families. You can work, and I'm sure this is probably where Maria's going to get to the next one also to answer this question. You can work on the immigration side, providing the legal services in the immigration needs that the survivors have. So there's a lot of different ways, and it's just a matter of you see your talents and your interests being best applied. On the prosecution side, that would be more on the Department of Homeland Security or Department of Justice, who are prosecuting the Johns and the exploiters and the pimps who are doing the human trafficking. So there's definitely a lot of different ways, but that's the first question that I would ask you is what side and what is your strength and your role?
Can I also add, those are perfect examples, ladies. And I also wanted to add, there's also ways outside of, what we all represent, in which you can help and be a part of this fight. I go out and I do outreaches to financial organizations, because why do traffickers do this? For financial gain, right? So more than likely, they're going to at one point enter a bank or have the victims enter a bank and even do crimes in that bank. So I educate the teller. So you can be a teller. You can be a bank representative. You can be a branch manager. I also go out to hotels. Hotels now have a law where they have to have posters and they have to have trainings. And if they don't get those trainings, they're fined. So you can work at a front desk at a hotel. You can work as a cleaning person in a hotel. You can work at a school. You can work at a teacher, and you can volunteer for any type of organization. All of our organizations, we have task force, we have nonprofits. So even if you don't have a physical, like a job that you're getting paid for, everyone can be a part of human trafficking. And then at some point also network and start working with any one of us, any one of our organizations.
Thank you, Katina. Yes, Dr. Pat.
I'm going to be a little more crass. Many of these organizations are not for profit and they need funding. And so how we fund, I'm sorry, I show me the money. We've been very hand to mouth in trying to get grants and so forth. But I don't mean just, send me the $10 and we'll use it to good. There's so many ways that you can organize your groups to contribute, not only dollars, but I know the state attorney's office collects clothing. And I know that for us, for example, we don't allow our victims, our survivors, to take public transportation if they have to have it. We give them an Uber card. you know, Target cards for toiletries. There's so many things that are, you know, either monetary or monetarily like that you can contribute. And if you are members of the Girl Scouts or whatever, you can get your organization to help out. And I think that's actually contributing a lot because it's tangible. And I know all of these organizations have a lot of free will and goodwill given to them, but it's great to be able to be self-sustaining.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Pat.
Sorry.
No, that's fine. That's great. That's good to know. Absolutely. Anyone else? Anyone else that would want to? Yes, Maria Jose.
I just want to add a word of caution that this is a crime and that we deal with criminals, and in many cases there's a lot of danger, and so to keep that in mind. So anything that you're thinking of doing, that safety is not only safety for the victim, the survivor, but safety for the service provider, the volunteer, the Good Samaritan. There are networks that are extremely dangerous, and they know how to get to the survivors, how to threaten, how to harm, prevent prosecutions, prevent investigations. So it's, I mean, I know there's a lot of ways to volunteer, but always be mindful that you're dealing with a serious crime being committed.
Thank you, Maria Jose. And along those lines, even when we report to the National Human Trafficking Hotline, the operators there have been trained so that when the report is being made, if I remember correctly, the operator has been trained to ensure that the person who's making the reporting is safe, but also to ensure that the person whom they are reporting about, that they're not jeopardizing them or putting them in harm's way either. Yes, I see a lot of things going on in the chat. I have another question that I'd like to address, and of course, this is a shameless plug because I'm education, and so the question is: are there any school-level programs for middle school students and high school students to create awareness? So I do want to share that with you all. So in Kristi House, we offer safety and prevention trainings, not only in middle school, but also starting from elementary school. And we use several different programs. One of the programs that we use is the Monique Burr Foundation's Child Safety Matters and Teen Safety Matters, which is a universal child abuse, sexual abuse, and now human trafficking safety and prevention training. And they've also added another arm to that, which is mental health. And so, and we are able to offer that now, even virtually. I think it's a wonderful comprehensive program. It's age appropriate, it's child friendly, and it's very comprehensive. The other program that we have is from Not a Number. The organization is called Love 146, and their program is called Not a Number. And this is a child exploitation, human trafficking prevention training. And this is for ages between the ages of 12 and 17. It is a very, it's trauma-informed, a very well-rounded program that really shows and supports youth to learn how to think on their feet. And it targets some of those different layers of human trafficking when we're talking about vulnerabilities, age vulnerabilities, gender differences that typically may not be addressed. And Nathan, I know that you're familiar with the program as well, very familiar with it. If you want to jump in, we cannot offer that program virtually. It has to be done in person, but I do want to share that with you that it is available. And we always are open to offer teen safe dating and internet safety programs. So just give us a call. We'll work with you, I promise.
The Not a Number, Deborah, we were talking about the narratives and stories that the boys can identify. One thing I love about it is it's so adaptable, that it does have case studies within the not a number of, you know, Samantha and the girls, but also George and Leo. So true case studies and narratives that the guys in the schools can, they can relate to.
Very true. Yes, yes, absolutely. Bradel, do you see any additional questions that you would like to add?
I'm looking through them.
And if not, then I'm going to ask the panelists if there's any last thoughts that you would like to share with us about your organization, about what you do, about how we can help keep our community safer. Anyone?
There's a question here I just want to bring up. I'm wondering, how can an employer not only be educated about human trafficking as a whole, but how can they support their specific employee? So I would say to that, you'd look up local trainings, and with so much being virtual right now, look up virtual trainings that you can attend that can assist you in getting more educated on, you know, the hiring process, the onboarding process, the supervising process of the survivor leader within your organization, and do your research and find trainings that they can attend, because there are trainings that they can attend, and not necessarily even for survivors. And so so there are some for survivors, and you can look into that. I think it's important to also plug them into survivor communities. And I'd say, you know, find out what their goals are within their position and within their career, and allow flexibility to be able to support them in those endeavors, and providing necessary trainings for those. So, for example, when I wanted to get into more public speaking, we tapped into our budget to be able to provide me with some business writing courses and public speaking courses. So, you know, when you allow fertile ground for a survivor in your organization to just blossom into their role and their goals, I mean, amazing things happen. And in order to do that, you need to be as educated and as supportive as you can. So I would say, get online, do your research, find trainings that seem like they're what you're looking for in that regard.
And I also just want to piggyback on that. And I think, you know, making sure that you know, as somebody that is supervising or employing survivors, you know, the needs of survivors emotionally is very important. You know, I think all of us come into any job, you know, and different things and different things that we see in our day might trigger us and our own histories and how it impacts and how we respond and how we react. But many times if survivors are doing any kind of direct service work, they're really consistently daily working on their trigger, on their trauma. They're being re-exposed, you know, in a lot of different ways. And so really making sure that there is, you know, a level of emotional support that you, if you are supervising or in a leadership position, really making sure that they have access to mental health support, that they have access to support from you, that they're able to take care of themselves in whatever ways that they might need, you know, when they are drained, when they are triggered, you know, so there is kind of, you know, as Bradel's saying, just a lot of different ways that we can equip ourselves to better understand. And it's really imperative to do so if you are going to have survivors on staff.
Well said. Yes.
And Elena, let me scroll up. Elena Munoz also asked a great question that I noticed earlier, and I'm glad she put it back into the chat. So trafficking thrives on money. As far as there is a demand, it will never stop. What can be done on that end to stop the demand? Who wants to chime in on that one? It's a great question.
All of us have to change a culture which has rap music with words that incite. We all need to look at how we approach the social aspects of raising our kids. Really, you're talking about going in and educating about the specific problem, but really educating them on the use of their words, on their actions, on the expectations of these boys, these girls, in terms of what constitutes success. It really is going to take a village who looks at itself in the mirror and says, we don't want to be this way. And as far as the Johns are concerned, I know the state attorney's office has put up billboards when they're arrested and convicted with their names and the information that they were essentially someone who solicited sex from, and that's allowable, and they're not going to be sued. Okay. On the other hand, you've got the Super Bowl owners who can get out of particular prosecutions when they are caught. So we have to look at ourselves and address our gaps, if you will.
I would like Nathan to maybe jump in on this one too, because I think it also has a lot to do, with, as Dr. Corrales is mentioning, just us as a society and our culture and how we're raising our boys, how we're raising our girls, how society contributes, and the messages that are put out there, sexuality, what it's, the gender bias of what women are supposed to be looking like and doing, and what males are supposed to be doing, and how males are supposed to express themselves. We have, who doesn't love J-Lo? She's an icon, but she's out there and she's doing movies, that are promoting stripping. And we have Cardi B, who's out there, who's a stripper. And you have Johns out there that are going to say, why don't you want to be the next Cardi B? And don't you want to be the next J-Lo? And so all of these things really prey on those kinds of vulnerabilities and what we as a society look up to. As Dr. Krause was saying on the Super Bowl, you did have, Jennifer Lopez on a stripper pole. So, and how many young girls are looking at that and wanting to be that. And it just opens up a lot of different vulnerabilities. Nathan, I don't know if you have anything to contribute to that.
Sure, no, that was great. I think we just have to be really diligent on broadening the scope, how we're framing this, what language we're using. And if we're using John, we got to use Jill. Women perpetrate too. Women and men buy sex from boys and girls. So there's such a gender, we've gendered this whole thing. So we have to recraft that narrative. And the reality, there was something in the chat box also. Do boys are trafficked for homosexual acts or just for pornography? That's another part of this conversation, is that it doesn't have anything to do with sexual orientation, guys, right? It's about the need, the vulnerability. Hunger sucks for a boy or a girl, right? That vulnerability. The opiate withdrawal that puts a person in a vulnerable position to be trafficked, it sucks for a guy or a girl, a transgender person, a non-binary. So we have to move away from this gendered conversation to really include everyone who is being affected, so he's being trafficked, but also who is trafficking. And I also want to add, there's, Johnny and Jill are two, children, and they both go through this form of victimization, and they both go through life. Neither one's trauma is being addressed, and so we know that without being addressed, that the chances can be higher for someone to perpetrate, right? It doesn't happen, but the chances are higher. So we have to invest more upstream as well, and the targeted prevention and intervention to connect young people with unaddressed the unaddressed trauma. We have to pivot resources, this public health approach, focus on intervention as opposed to just the moment of the moment of trafficking occurs. Because the reality is, guys, that guys, girls, regardless of your sexual orientation, yes, it's for sexual abuse imagery, sexual abuse video, they're being exploited, and left unabated, the chances are higher of being of perpetrating. And then what happens then? They're a pedophile and they're sent to prison for the rest of their life because we as a society didn't want to kind of talk about something and gaps in our community.
Amen to that, Nathan. Snap, snap.
I also want to add, this question is like the $1 million question, right? And I have to say, where even so far, just like my daughter the other day, my daughter's in her 20s, and she's like, Mom, I don't understand how you can make someone, how they fall into this, and how someone can make someone have sex or work some and not get the money. And, you know, so why doesn't she understand? Let's go to that. Is because me as a mother had instilled certain things, and I have made sure that she has whatever emotional needs she has. And even at that, she probably lacks some and needs to move on for her own. So what is that? That's self-love, right? Each and every one of us are not going to allow someone to disrespect us. They're not going to allow someone to take our self-worth. Why? Because we've built that. We've learned from past experiences, past traumas, past abuse. So where does this all start again? Where does this all start? Because we're not born wanting to be a prostitute. We're not born wanting to be abused. We're not born, even pimps and traffickers are not born wanting to do this. They were abused. Hurt people. So we go back to, we've all talked about PTSD. We've all talked about the mental abuse, the sexual abuse. And honestly, what can we do? We're doing it right now. This is what we're doing. So everybody who learned anything new today, take what you learned and talk about it. Talk about it to someone else. Get on the phone and say, hey, I learned this today. You're going to educate that person. That person tells another person. This is what we're doing. We are doing, the answer to that question is we are doing it right now. And again, look in the home. I'm not saying that all of us are bad parents, that we had bad parents. Even the victims and the survivors. Sometimes I've worked with children and adults who came from loving homes. There was just something that they either needed to look like, why do people use drugs? Why are people addicted? They're fighting some type of pain inside. So honestly, in my experience, that's what I find is start in the home, and then don't be afraid. And we are becoming a culture now where it's okay to express yourself. It's okay to be in the LGBT community. It's okay to do what you want, especially with social media. So I think we're getting better, because when I started 8 years ago, there was it was like, we don't talk about this. You know, we don't talk about this in the schools. We're not going to teach the kids about this because it gives them, it plants an idea, or turn your face, or just a person themselves, even sex abuse. In the families, in our cultures, way back then, in my own family, there was sex abuse. No one talked about it because we didn't want to like really process it in our head. It's a trauma to us. We, as people that work in this, receive secondhand trauma. We all need self-care and help. So what we're doing right now is the answer to that question. We are working. The courts are you know, the judges are giving larger sentences, showing examples. There's so much every day. It's growing. So we are doing what we need to do.
Thank you, Katina. I appreciate that. I have one last question, and then we're going to wrap it up. And the question is, do you happen to know the percentage of Black people that are trafficked, especially in Miami-Dade? So we really haven't spoken about that today, about race, traffic victims. And is there anyone here that can speak to that?
Can you repeat the question, Deborah?
Yes, it's the question. Hold on, I'm looking for it, and again, it's just.
Deborah, let me just say that a statement was made when we first started out that trafficking occurs across cultural, social, demographic, financial zip codes. And so I think it's a myth that African Americans or Latinos have higher rates of trafficking. Certainly, and we're talking about immigration and labor trafficking, that might be true, but we're not necessarily seeing, at least in the Thrive Clinic, greater numbers of African Americans or Latinos. We're seeing them from all over. And, you know, Pinecrest is equally represented as much as Overtown is. So I think it's critical to get out of that mindset. Yes, poverty plays a role, no question about it. But there can be a poverty of social issues related certainly in the white non-Latin communities that causes a particular child to go into this situation. So we're not seeing higher numbers of African Americans,
Very good.
at least
Thank
in
you.
Thrive.
Yeah, I wanted to, it was one of the few questions that was brought up that had to do with race, and so I wanted to bring it up. And also, I was given a little signal by one of my education folks that it was important to bring it up. So thank you, and I think it's.
And I just want to add to that. Go ahead,
Sure.
Teresa.
Yeah, I mean, I can say from the perspective of the numbers that we look at, that I see just from Florida hotline, that we do see a higher number of, again, this is information as it's called into the hotline, so it's provided when it's called in, and you'll enter that information accurately, right? That is only as good as the person who's entering it. We do have a higher number of people of color and of Black people, but more importantly, the next level that I am going to be local data, and starting with Broward and Miami-Dade County, is really trying to look at the total population in comparison to what those numbers look like. Because I think that tells the more important story. I could tell you that I have a higher number in reports, but if I'm not looking at what our total population of minors are, that's not really going to tell us what the prevalence is. So as I have that information, you'll see my contact information. People can feel free to reach out for local statistics. I'm happy to report it. I will, of course, share it with Kristi House, and they'd be able to put any information they felt was relevant on their website. But that is something that I think a lot of us are trying to look into more deeply, just to see what it looks like. But Dr. Pat's point is really important. No one should assume that there's any one group of individuals that isn't possibly, couldn't possibly fall victim to human trafficking. It does affect all races, gender, and sexuality.
Thank you, Teresa. Thank you very much. Yes, Bradel.
Yes, I was going to say that I find that the demographic of the victims are very reflective to whatever the ratio, the racial ratio is within that area. So I find that it's very reflective of that here anyway. So I would assume the same would apply for other areas. If you look at what the general racial ratio with the demographic of a city or a county, it's reflective of that.
I would also caution that when you look at those numbers, you also have to look at what motivates people to call. And so like with interpersonal violence, it seemingly was higher in African Americans, but it turns out that it might be that they're more willing to call it in and say that it's occurring, so, and report, rather than it actually being higher numbers of events. So we have to look, study, and address the issues, and really should be done zip code by zip code, because it might be poverty related and not so much just a race or an ethnicity concern.
And if I could add, Deborah, too, that just from the national and the regional data and research that we've looked at, specifically looking at disaggregated data, Dr. Carlos, I echo what you've just said, is it can depend on zip code, it can depend on region. But I think it's just important to mention, when we're looking at this from a public health perspective, when we look at the health determinants that can lead to forms of violence, we do know that there are certain populations that experience those lack of access to education. And when we're looking at the numbers of, okay, well, we have more white people or more white cases, we also need to, I think we all know that in many of these cases, people are reporting white children more often than Black or Latinx or Native American. We do have disproportionate representation of opportunity youth who identify as Black and Latinx within these communities. So I definitely agree that we need to take the data and the statistics with a grain of salt, with that portrait or with that landscape view, but be mindful that there are communities who, because of lack of access to education or the mistrust of law enforcement to report, can and may be affected disproportionately. If I can just add that.
That's a great point, Nathan.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
To add one, if I could just add very briefly to that, that also all of these risk factors make people more vulnerable. So the poverty, racism, lack of education, lack of access to healthcare, all of that makes a child or an adult more vulnerable and thus more susceptible to being groomed or being trafficked. So it's something additionally to keep in mind along with everything else I was also mentioned.
But yeah, and something that also, you know, stems beyond, you know, even those vulnerabilities is, you know, a history of sexual abuse, which knows no race or no ethnicity, makes someone more vulnerable to being groomed or trafficked. And so I think it's important to know that the vulnerabilities really at the end of the day do not stem with some major or minor group. It knows no skin color, it knows no language.
Thank you so much. So that's a really great way, from my point of view, to end the conversation today and to create and to offer insight about that, particularly nowadays. So we are at the end of our time. I want to again thank each and every one of you for taking time from your day to participate on the panel. Personally, I want to say thank you so much for putting up with my emails throughout the last several months and for following through and sending me your information. It is greatly appreciated. I do look forward to doing this again with you all. I've enjoyed it. I hope that you all have. I am going to ask Patricia or Joe to share the screen with us quickly to bring up our PowerPoint, just to offer some contact information to everyone at large, so that you all can have everyone's contact information. The education team has dropped the survey in the chat once again. Please, it is really important for us, the education team, Kristi House as a whole, nonprofit, for you all to complete that pre and post test. We would really appreciate it. Please know that we will, in addition to that, we will be posting the recording of this session on our website, and we will also try to send it out to, there you go, and present, there you go, thank you. We will also be placing it in on our website. If you could go back a couple of slides, I'd appreciate it really quickly. And stop right there, panelist contact information. There you go, thanks so much, present. Awesome. So you may want to have a copy in PDF, or you may want to just take a quick picture. This is the contact information of all the panelists that we have here today. From the bottom of my heart, thanks so much to each and every one of you. Please go on to the next slide. And these are resources. So these are some of the resources that the panelists refer to. You can take a quick shot of this. So the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, Obtaining Post-Conviction Relief for Survivors of Human Trafficking, the National Human Trafficking Resource Center Hotline, telephone number, and the Polaris Project. So you can text Be Free to 23373. I really think it's really important to offer the resources to the folks who are viewing today. Next slide, please. And these are organizations in Miami that can support and who are anti-trafficking. So we have Kristi House Project Gold, Survivors Pathway, Arc of Freedom Alliance, Glory House, and the Citrus Chance Program. We also have a CVAC, I'd like to mention them, and the local state attorney's office rapid response telephone number. And if I am forgetting a resource that you all think needs to be mentioned here, please let me know and I'll be happy to add it. So every time I present or we present in the community can have all of the resources, right? This takes a village and it takes a lot of agencies to work together. Next slide, please. This is our different locations, our Kristi House locations. Next slide, please. And this is the post-test survey, so we will wait for your responses, and please remember that the pre-test and the post-test survey, you will be using the same link. Thank you. And next slide, please. Kristi House Education team, here we are. And I do want to give a special shout out. She is not here today because she's at home, but she is listening in. I want to give a special shout out to Sarah Al-Shirati. She is an intern that has been supporting, an intern completing her master's in mental health, but she's also employed at Grace Court, and she has supported me a lot in doing outreach. So thank you, Sarah, and we appreciate you. Next slide, please. And last but not least, on behalf of Kristi House and Project Gold, thank you for your time. Thank you for your participation. And again, thanks to the panelists. And I am going to end it here. And thanks, everyone. Make it a great day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye, everyone. Thank you.